The crystalline spires of the Syndicate flagship pierced the dawn sky over Geneva, its iridescent hull reflecting Earth's sunrise in waves of purple and gold. Captain Rena Blake stood at attention before the United Earth Council, her decorated military uniform a stark contrast to the flowing, ethereal robes of the alien diplomats surrounding her. 20 years of military service hadn't prepared her for this moment, humanity's first official contact with the Syndicate Empire. Queen Vexthara's holographic form materialized before the assembly, her elongated figure towering at 12 feet tall. Multiple arms moved in hypnotic patterns as she spoke, her voice like wind chimes in a digital storm. People of Earth, we come bearing gifts of knowledge and technology. The Syndicate Empire welcomes you into our grand coalition of species. Rena felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of the chamber. Something about the Queen's movements seemed practiced, artificial. She'd spent enough time in deep space reconnaissance to know when something felt off, and everything about this felt wrong. The Queen's primary ambassador, a being called Kivex, approached the council with a hovering tray of what appeared to be jewelry. Delicate, silvery pieces that pulsed with their own inner light. These are harmony bands, Kivex explained, his translator converting complex clicking sounds into smooth English. They represent our commitment to peace and understanding between our peoples. Rena watched as the council members eagerly accepted the gifts, her trained eyes catching the microscopic flickers of light emanating from the bands. She'd seen similar technology before, in classified reports about deep space surveillance equipment. But she kept her face neutral, years of diplomatic training coming in handy. That evening, in her secure apartment, overlooking the Geneva lakes, Rena conducted her own investigation. She'd accidentally dropped her harmony band into a glass of water, a move that would seem clumsy to any observers. Under the liquid's surface, the band's outer shell dissolved, revealing exactly what she'd feared: quantum transmission nodes, capable of reading and broadcasting everything from biometric data to thought patterns. She encrypted a message to her old friend and brilliant stenotechnologist, Dr. Jin Zhao, using their private channel. The moths have landed. Time to check for eggs. Within hours, Dr. Zhao's team had discreetly analyzed the gifts being distributed worldwide. The results confirmed Rena's suspicions. Every single piece of Syndicate technology was embedded with surveillance capabilities far beyond anything humanity had encountered. But the real breakthrough came 3 weeks later. Rena was reviewing diplomatic logs when her AI assistant flagged an anomaly in the Syndicate's communication patterns. Every 72 hours, during Earth's lowest global activity period, massive data bursts were being sent to a location far beyond the diplomatic flagship. Dr. Zhao's voice trembled when she delivered her findings via secure quantum link. These aren't diplomatic surveys, Rena. They're targeting algorithms, the kind used for planetary harvest operations. I've cross-referenced them with historical data from other systems. Every civilization that accepted Syndicate protection was gone within 5 years. Not conquered, harvested, down to the molecular level. Rena stared out at the Syndicate flagship, its beautiful crystalline form now seeming more like a predator's lure. How many people know about this? Just my core team. We've been using isolated quantum systems for analysis. As far as we can tell, they haven't detected our investigation. A plan began forming in Rena's mind. The Syndicate's technology was advanced, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for paranoia. Despite the public acceptance of the alien delegation, key military and research installations had maintained their independent monitoring systems. Jin, Remember that biodampening field you were developing for deep space missions? How quickly can you scale it up? The prototype, it could mask a small facility maybe. But building enough to shield a planet, that's impossible with our current resources. Rena smiled grimly. We don't need to shield the planet. We just need to make them think their harvest won't work. Get me everything you have on their biological scanning technology. And Jin, find out if any other species in their coalition might be willing to help us. There's no way we're the first ones to figure this out. As she ended the transmission, Rena caught her reflection in the window. Behind her, the Harmony Band lay dark and silent in its bowl of water, its surveillance systems permanently compromised. The real question wasn't whether humanity could outsmart the Syndicate Queen. It was how many other civilizations might be waiting for exactly this moment to strike back. The game was on, and Earth's pieces were already in motion. The abandoned quantum research facility beneath the Swiss Alps had never been listed on any official documents. Now, 2 months after first contact, it hummed with activity. Rena surveyed the growing coalition of humans and alien defectors who had made this their base of operations. The irony wasn't lost on her. They had turned one of humanity's most paranoid Cold War relics into the headquarters of an interstellar resistance. The Queen's biological matrix is unlike anything we've encountered, explained Zixtel, a former Syndicate biotechnology specialist who had defected after discovering the truth about his own world's harvesting. His translucent skin rippled with bioluminescent patterns as he manipulated the holographic display. But every living thing has its weaknesses, even Vexstar. Dr. Jin Zhao nodded, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. The Harmony Bands gave us access to their basic biological data. They were so confident in their technology's security that they never considered we might crack it this quickly. Rena watched as more data streamed across the displays. The underground chamber had become a nexus of rebellion, housing representatives from 12 different species, all former protectorates of the Syndicate who had managed to preserve small resistance cells. Each brought their own piece of the puzzle, their own experience with the Queen's methods. Show me the analysis of their neural network again, Rena requested, studying the complex patterns that represented the Syndicate's hive-mind communication system. The Queen's control over her empire wasn't just political, it was biological. Every loyal member of the Syndicate carried trace amounts of the Queen's DNA, allowing her to exert subtle control over their actions and thoughts. Thurin, a crystalline being whose people had nearly been wiped out by the Syndicate centuries ago, stepped forward. Their faceted body refracted the room's light as they spoke. We discovered something interesting in the genetic coding. The Queen's control isn't absolute. It requires constant reinforcement through the Empire's communication network. Which explains the regular data bursts, Jin added, pulling out the transmission logs. They're not just surveillance reports, they're control signals. Rena felt a smile forming. So if we disrupt those signals, the entire Empire could break free, Zixtel finished, his skin flashing with excitement patterns. But the window would be small. Once the Queen realizes what's happening, she'll switch to emergency protocols. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. While the Syndicate continued their diplomatic charm offensive on the surface, the resistance grew stronger underground. Jin and her team worked with the alien scientists to develop what they called the Freedom Protocol, a complex virus designed to infiltrate the Syndicate's neural network and temporarily sever the Queen's control. But they needed more than just technology. Rena spent countless hours training with Thurin and other alien warriors, learning their combat techniques. The Queen's royal guards were infamous for their brutality, and if their plan was to succeed, they would need every advantage they could get. "Your species adapts quickly," observed Kilara, a shadow warrior from the Nexus worlds, as she helped Rena master their unique style of gravitational combat. "Most take years to learn what you've grasped in weeks." "We've had lots of practice adapting," Rena replied, using her new gravity manipulator to dodge Kilara's attack. Earth's history is basically one long story of adapt or die. The breakthrough came during a routine analysis of the Queen's communication patterns. One of Jin's assistants noticed something odd in the data streams, microscopic fluctuations that corresponded to the Queen's physical location within her flagship. "It's like a biological GPS," Jin explained excitedly. "Every transmission carries a trace of her actual neural signature. We can track her movements in real time." Rena immediately saw the potential. "Can we use this to predict when she'll be most vulnerable?" Zixtel's skin rippled with affirmative patterns. "The Queen must enter a regenerative state every 48 hours. During this time, her connection to the neural network is at its weakest." The pieces were falling into place. They had the means to disrupt the Queen's control, the ability to track her movements, and a growing army of trained resistance fighters. But they would only get one chance. If their first strike failed, the Queen would simply harvest Earth immediately rather than waiting to complete her usual surveillance routine. As Rena looked around the war room at the diverse group of beings working together, humans and aliens united against a common threat, she felt a surge of pride. The Queen had made a fundamental mistake in her calculations. She had assumed that fear would keep her subjects in line forever. She had never considered that fear might be exactly what would bring them together. "Begin final preparations," Rena ordered. "We move in 3 days, during her next regeneration cycle." The resistance members snapped into action, each knowing their role in the complex plan they had developed. As they dispersed, Thurin approached Rena with their crystalline form dimmed in what she had learned was their expression of concern. "The Queen has never been defeated in direct confrontation," they said softly. "Many have tried." Rena nodded, checking the power cell on her newly modified combat suit. "True, but she's never faced humans working together with their own subjects before. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't the strongest, it's the one you never see coming." As the Resistance made their final preparations, high above them the Syndicate flagship continued its peaceful orbit around Earth, its crystalline spires still catching the sunlight like a beautiful deadly trap. In just 3 days, they would attempt something no species had ever managed. They would bring the fight directly to the Queen's doorstep. The countdown had begun. The Syndicate flagship's crystalline corridors pulsed with an ethereal blue light as Rena and her infiltration team moved silently through the maintenance shafts. Thanks to Zixtel's inside knowledge, they had managed to smuggle themselves aboard during a routine supply transfer, their life signs masked by the biodampening technology Jin had perfected. "Security drones approaching," whispered Kilara, her shadow form rippling as she monitored the advanced sensor array they'd brought. "Pattern suggests standard sweep." Rena signaled the team to hold position. Their group was small but diverse. Herself, Kilara, 2 of Thurin's crystalline warriors, and Zix Telephone each had been chosen for their specific abilities, and each carried a piece of the virus that would disrupt the Queen's control network. The drones passed by their position, their scanning beams sweeping harmlessly through the dampening field. Rena couldn't help but smile. The Queen's own arrogance had made this possible. The Syndicate relied so heavily on their biological control network that their physical security was surprisingly basic. "We have 19 minutes until the Queen enters her regeneration chamber," Zixtel reported, his skin patterns shifting to display a countdown. The neural network will be at its weakest point then. They continued their advance through the ship's infrastructure, using maintenance tubes that hadn't seen organic traffic in centuries. The flagship's interior was a maze of crystalline growths and biomechanical interfaces, all pulsing with the same rhythmic light that seemed to beat like a heart. "Hold," Rena commanded suddenly, noticing a change in the light patterns. "Something's different here." One of the crystalline warriors, Valix, stepped forward. Their faceted body began resonating with the ship's frequencies. "The neural density is higher in this section. We're approaching one of the primary control nodes." This was their first target. To disable the Queen's network, they needed to upload their virus to 3 separate control nodes simultaneously. The timing had to be perfect, too early, and the system would detect and purge the intrusion; too late, and the Queen would emerge from regeneration before they could complete their mission. Kilara melted into the shadows, skirting ahead. When she returned, her form was agitated. Heavy guard presence around the node, 4 royal guards, and automated defense systems. Royal guards, the Queen's elite warriors, genetically enhanced and personally bound to her will. They were notorious for their brutality and their absolute loyalty. Fighting them would be suicide. "We don't fight them," Rena said, pulling out a small device Jin had created. "We give them what they're looking for." The device activated, projecting a massive surge of life signs several corridors away. As predicted, the guards immediately moved to investigate the potential threat, leaving only the automated systems guarding the node. Valix and their crystalline companion stepped forward, their bodies beginning to resonate at specific frequencies. The automated systems, designed to detect and respond to movement and energy signatures, were blind to their crystalline composition when they matched the ship's own resonance perfectly. Working quickly, Zixtel interfaced with the node while the others stood guard. His bioluminescent patterns flashed rapidly as he uploaded the first part of their virus. Upload complete, but the system is already starting to detect anomalies. The other teams will need to move fast. Across the ship, 2 other infiltration teams were approaching their targets. Everything depended on their synchronized attack. Rena checked the countdown, 11 minutes until the Queen entered regeneration. They were about to move when Kilara suddenly solidified, her form rigid with alarm. "The guards are returning." They detected the deception. Rena made a split-second decision. "Zixtel, Valix, proceed to the secondary rendezvous point. Kilara, time to show them why your people are called Shadow Warriors." Before the others could object, Rena activated her combat suit's experimental features. Jin had modified it with salvaged Syndicate technology, allowing it to partially mimic Kilara's shadow-shifting abilities. Not perfect invisibility, but enough to confuse and distract. The Royal Guards rounded the corner just as Kilara melted into darkness, and Rena's suit shifted her into a state of semi-transparency. The guards' reaction was immediate and violent, their enhanced bodies surging forward with impossible speed. What followed was a dance of shadows and violence. Kilara moved like liquid darkness, striking from impossible angles, while Rena used her modified suit to appear and disappear, landing precise blows in the gaps of the guards' armor. Their fighting styles complemented each other perfectly. Kilara's fluid grace and Rena's tactical precision creating a deadly symphony. One guard went down, then another. The third managed to activate an alarm before Kilara's shadow blade found a weak point in its armor. The fourth was smarter, falling back to call for reinforcement, but Rena's training with the gravity manipulator paid off. A precisely timed gravitational pulse sent the guard crashing into a crystalline wall with bone-crushing force. Well, Rena said, checking the countdown as her suit returned to normal visibility, that's going to complicate things. 7 minutes remained until the Queen's regeneration cycle, and now the entire ship would be on high alert. Kilara reformed beside her, her shadowy form showing signs of fatigue. The other teams will face increased resistance now. Then we'll have to give them something else to worry about. Rena pulled out her last resort, a device that even Jin had advised against using. How do you feel about creating a really big distraction? Kilara's form rippled with what Rena had learned was amusement. Is this one of those famous human plans that's either brilliant or suicidal? Usually both, Rena replied, programming the device. Want to help me temporarily overload the ship's entire power grid? As alarms blared and reinforcements rushed toward their position, Rena couldn't help but think that the Queen had made yet another mistake. She had built an empire on control and fear, never understanding that sometimes the most effective weapon was chaos itself. They had 6 minutes to turn the flagship into complete chaos, giving the other teams their chance to upload the virus. After that, they would have to fight their way to the Queen's regeneration chamber itself. The real battle was about to begin. The flagship's emergency lighting cast crimson shadows through the crystalline corridors as Rena and Kilara fought their way toward the regeneration chamber. Their power grid overload had worked better than expected, perhaps too well. Entire sections of the ship were in darkness, with backup systems failing under the strain. 2 minutes until target emergence, Kilara reported, her shadow form pulsing with urgency. The ship shuddered around them as secondary explosions rippled through its infrastructure. Rena's modified combat suit was running hot, its energy reserves depleting after multiple encounters with royal guards. They had lost contact with the other teams, but the occasional burst of weapons fire and distant explosions suggested they weren't the only ones still fighting. Status update from Zixtel, Kilara announced as they reached a major junction. 2nd and 3rd nodes are infected. The virus is spreading through the network. A massive door of living crystal blocked their path to the regeneration chamber. Unlike the rest of the ship's crystalline structure, this barrier pulsed with its own inner light, a direct extension of the Queen's biological matrix. Valix, we need you, Rena called into her comm unit. Moments later, the crystalline warrior emerged from an adjacent corridor, their faceted bodies showing signs of combat damage, but still functional. Valix pressed against the barrier, their body beginning to resonate at multiple frequencies. The door's crystalline structure responded, creating harmonics that made Rena's teeth ache. Slowly, impossibly, a section of the barrier began to dissolve. Warning! Valix's translated voice was strained. The Queen. She's awake early. She knows. The words had barely registered when the entire chamber flooded with blinding light. The barrier shattered, sending crystalline shards flying in all directions. Kilara's shadow form enveloped Rena and Valix, protecting them from the worst of the debris. When the light faded, they found themselves facing something out of humanity's darkest nightmares. Queen Vexthara's true form was nothing like the elegant hologram she presented to Earth. Her body was a massive amalgamation of crystalline structures and organic matter, multiple limbs extending from a central mass that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Her actual height was closer to 20 feet, and each movement sent ripples of power through the ship's structure. Fascinating, the Queen's voice resonated directly in their minds, her actual communication bypassing all translation systems. You've managed to infect my network, disable my guards, and reach my inner sanctum. I haven't encountered such entertainment in centuries. Rena stepped forward, her suit's sensors squealing warnings about the massive energy readings emanating from the Queen. "It's over, Vexthar. Your control over the Empire is breaking. The harvesting stops now." The Queen's crystalline form shifted, creating patterns that somehow conveyed amusement. "You think this is about harvesting? About control?" A limb the size of a small car gestured, and the chamber's walls became transparent, revealing Earth floating beneath them. "This is about evolution, Captain Blake, about pushing species to their limits. And your kind, you've exceeded all expectations. By resisting you." Kilara's shadow form rippled with defiance. "By working together," the Queen replied. "Each species I harvest provides something unique to the Empire. But humans, you unite others. You inspire cooperation where there should be only fear. You're a catalyst for chaos in my perfect order." Rena noticed something as the Queen spoke, subtle changes in the bioluminescent patterns across her form. The virus was working, slowly disrupting her connection to the neural network. They just needed to keep her talking. "If we're so interesting, why harvest us at all?" Rena challenged, subtly signaling Kilara and Valix to move into position. The Queen's form pulsed with what might have been pride. "Because that is the final test. Either you find a way to stop me, proving yourselves worthy of true independence, or you become part of something greater. Countless civilizations have faced this choice. Only a handful have ever come this far. And now we have your answer," Rena said, activating her suit's final protocol, the one Jin had warned might kill her. Her armor began to resonate at the exact frequency of the Queen's crystalline structure, sending waves of destructive harmonics through the chamber. The Queen's response was immediate and violent. Crystalline spears erupted from the floor as her form shifted into a combat configuration. Kilara's shadow form darted between the attacks, while Valix began to emit counter-frequencies that turned sections of the chamber into weapons. What followed was a battle beyond anything in human experience. The Queen commanded the very structure of her ship, turning walls into weapons and gravity itself into an opponent. Kilara's shadow powers kept them alive barely, while Valix's crystalline abilities prevented the Queen from simply crushing them outright. But it was Rena's modified suit, burning through its power cells at a lethal rate, that kept the Queen off balance. Every time Vexthara tried to reconnect to her neural network, the suit's harmonics disrupted the attempt. The virus continued its work, spreading through the Empire's communication systems. "You cannot comprehend what you're destroying," the Queen raged, her attacks becoming more erratic as her connection to the Empire weakened. "The order I have maintained for millennia is built on fear and slavery," Rena finished, even as her suit's warnings reached critical levels. "And we're replacing it with something stronger. Choice." The Queen reared up, gathering power for what was clearly meant to be a final, devastating attack. But in that moment, all the lights in the chamber flickered. Throughout the ship, throughout the entire Empire, the neural network seized, and for the first time in centuries went silent. The Queen's form crystallized, her connection to her own flagship severed. The virus had done its work. The Empire's people were free. But as Rena's suit failed and the Queen's form began to crack, she realized this wasn't quite the end. The flagship's systems were still failing, and Earth was still vulnerable. They had won the battle against the Queen, but the war to save humanity was far from over. "Rena," Kilara called urgently, her shadow form supporting the human's failing suit. "We need to move. The ship's core is destabilizing." As they retreated from the chamber, Rena looked back at the crystallizing form of the Queen. In the end, Vexthara's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating humanity's strength or ingenuity. It had been believing that fear was stronger than hope. The real question now was, what would a free empire choose to become? The view from the Emergency Command Center deep beneath Geneva showed chaos unfolding in Earth's orbit. The Syndicate flagship, once a marvel of crystalline perfection, was now breaking apart, massive sections of its structure shattering into the void. Emergency shuttles and escape pods streamed from its failing hull like a meteor shower in reverse. Rena watched from a medical pod, her body still recovering from the effects of her suit's final override. Dr. Jin Zhao hadn't left her side since the evacuation, monitoring both her condition and the stream of data from the disintegrating flagship. The virus worked better than we anticipated, Jin reported, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. It's not just the neural network that's down. The entire Empire's communication system is rebooting. Every enslaved species is breaking free simultaneously. Through the command center's windows, Rena could see the crystalline debris from the flagship, creating auroral patterns in the atmosphere. A beautiful death for something so terrible. Any sign of surviving royal guards? None, Clara answered, her shadow form manifesting from a dark corner. Those who survived the battle have surrendered. Without the Queen's control, they're lost. Many are asking for asylum. The next few weeks were a blur of diplomatic activity, unlike anything in human history. As the Empire's control dissolved, thousands of alien species found themselves truly free for the first time in generations. The power vacuum should have led to chaos, war, and collapse. Instead, something remarkable happened. It's fascinating, Thurin observed during one of the many council sessions that followed. Their crystalline form had been repaired after the battle, now shimmering with renewed purpose. The Queen believed she was testing species by forcing them to resist her. Instead, she accidentally created the perfect conditions for unprecedented cooperation. They were right. The resistance network that had formed to fight the Queen became the foundation for something new, an alliance based on mutual support rather than control. Earth, as the catalyst for the Queen's defeat, found itself at the center of this emerging coalition. The Queen's greatest fear was chaos, Rena said during a session with the newly formed Galactic Coalition Council. She had finally recovered enough to take her place as Earth's representative. But she never understood that chaos and freedom are what drive innovation, adaptation, and growth. The Queen's vast archives, recovered from the flagship's wreckage, revealed the true scope of her centuries-long experiment. Each harvested civilization had contributed something unique to the Empire's biological and technological evolution. Now, freed from her control, these advances were being shared openly among all species. Zixtel, working with Jin and scientists from dozens of species, had already begun adapting the Empire's biotechnology for peaceful purposes. The same neural network that had once enslaved billions was being repurposed into a revolutionary communication system, one that facilitated understanding rather than control. "We're calling it the Unity Network," Jin explained during a demonstration. Unlike the Queen's version, it's completely voluntary and transparent. It allows species to share knowledge and experiences while maintaining their independence. The changes weren't without challenges. Some former Syndicate worlds, lost without the Queen's guidance, initially resisted the new order. Others sought revenge for centuries of oppression. But for each crisis that arose, the coalition found strength in its diversity. Clara's shadow warriors became peacekeepers, their unique abilities perfect for diffusing conflicts before they could escalate. Thurin's people used their crystalline technology to help rebuild worlds devastated by the Empire's collapse. Even the reformed royal guards found a new purpose. Their enhanced abilities turned to protection rather than oppression. 6 months after the Queen's defeat, Rena stood on the observation deck of humanity's first true starship, a hybrid vessel combining Earth's innovations with freed alien technology. The ship's name, Unity's Dawn, was written in multiple alien scripts along its hull. "Ready for your first official diplomatic mission, Captain?" Kilara asked, her shadow form now permanently assigned as Earth's security liaison. Rena smiled, touching the small crystal shard she wore as a reminder, a piece of the Queen's chamber, now repurposed as a symbol of transformation. "You know what still amazes me? The Queen spent centuries trying to force evolution through fear and control. In the end, all it took to create something better was giving people the freedom to choose." The starship's engines hummed to life, its revolutionary hybrid drive preparing for its first flight. In orbit above Earth, the debris field from the Syndicate flagship had been largely cleared away. Some pieces had been preserved in a memorial orbit, their crystalline surfaces now inscribed with a simple message in every known language: "Freedom is the greatest catalyst for change." As Unity's Dawn prepared to launch, carrying representatives from 50 different species on its maiden voyage, Rena reflected on the Queen's final words about humanity being a catalyst for chaos. She had been right in a way. Humans were agents of change, of disruption to ordered systems. But the Queen had never understood that chaos wasn't humanity's only gift. Their real strength lay in their ability to forge connections, to turn adversaries into allies, and to find hope in the darkest situations. The bridge crew, a mix of humans and aliens working in seamless coordination, signaled ready for launch. As they prepared to make their first faster-than-light jump, Rena gave the command that would start humanity's next great adventure. "Let's show the galaxy what freedom can really build." The ship disappeared into the depths of space, carrying with it the seeds of a new era, one built not on fear and control, but on choice, cooperation, and the endless possibilities that come with true freedom. Behind them, Earth continued its orbit around the Sun, its night side now gleaming with the lights of alien embassies and cultural centers. In the end, the Queen had succeeded in changing the course of evolution, just not in the way she had intended. For in trying to harvest humanity, she had instead planted the seeds of her empire's transformation into something far greater than she could have imagined. The end.